They can head upstairs for children's worship. So last week, we started thinking about love and what love is. We're just taking 3 weeks doing a short series on what love is. And here's what we said last week. Love is important. Love is important. And we took that further and said, if love is actually really that important, then we ought to define what love is. And we ought to think through what love is. If you weren't here last week, if you weren't a part of that, I encourage you to go back and watch that. You can see it on our YouTube channel or our website. You can see it there. But it's important to define what love is so that when we start describing what love is, we're all coming from the same place. And we actually have a definition we're working from. Definitions matter, right? So love is important, and here's one of the big things that we saw last week was that God is the source and the substance of love. That's the center. When we're talking about love, we have a lot of words or a lot of ways we use the word love. We said last week I can say I love pizza and I love my spouse in the same breath, and you'd better hope I don't mean the same thing. So what we're talking about is love in its biggest, best form, in its most comprehensive form. We're talking about God's love. God's love is a better way. That's what we're going to think about today. God's love is a better way. So here's what I want that to ring in your ears and your thinking and your feeling as we go from here. This person hurt me. I want to get even. But God's love is a better way, right? I could do this to get ahead, but I'm not going to because God's love is a better way. I really don't want to be patient, but I'm going to because God's love is a better way. You get it? We learned this from 1 Corinthians chapter 13. If you want to turn there with me, that's where we're going to spend our time today. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. This is in the middle of a letter that was written a long time ago from a man named Paul. And he was writing this as God's very word through him to a church. And this church was doing all kinds of things. And Paul was looking at it and saying, let's talk about who you really are, the ways you're trying to engage in life, and is it really working? And so one of the ways they were trying to do church that you see in the beginning of 1 Corinthians is they were really getting, I guess you could say, getting their jollies. They were being built up by, I like this preacher better than that preacher. I follow him, and he's a way better preacher than the guy you follow. And he said, stop that. And then he gets to this part and says, love's a better way. They were building up their selves, saying, man, I have wisdom. I really am a wise person. Yeah, you guys don't really understand what wisdom is. You need to hear what I'm saying. Love is a better way. They had people in the church. There was somebody in the church who was actually sleeping with his mother-in-law, having sex with her. And they didn't want to deal with that. They just kind of let it go on. And he says, that's a huge problem. That's not love, letting them do that. Love is a better way. He goes on, the section right around the chapter we're in, it's dealing with the thing of spiritual gifts. And he's addressing them, and they had problems with it, competing over it. And he says, you're elevating one and diminishing others. You're saying these people are better because they have this gifting, and these people aren't as good because they don't have these giftings. And he says you should actually celebrate the weakest gifts because you have it all twisted. Love is a more excellent way, is the way chapter 12 ends. And then we saw in verses 1 through 3 last week that love is important. Today we're going to see 2 different sections. We're going to think a little bit about what love is, then we're going to think a little bit about what love is not. What love is, and then what love is not. So let's just jump in at verse 4. Verse 4 reads like this. Love is patient. Love is kind. That's the love is. Then after that, it jumps into 8 things that love isn't. So let's look at these things that love is. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is patient. That's the first one. Love is patient. That word patience is actually a verb, as all of these descriptions are. Isn't that kind of weird? You would think that would be describing the noun as an adjective, but it's actually a verb. That's kind of interesting. All of these are in the original language, in the Greek, when you read them. And there's state of being verbs and there's action verbs. So you don't need to say, okay, well that means love is patienting is a better, translation. It's a state of being verb. What does that mean? Love doesn't change. Love is constantly like this. Why is that? Because we saw last week God is love. God is the source and the substance of love. And that's why love is always patient. Always ready to be patient. If there isn't patience, it's not love. Wow. Love is patient. Love, you could say it this way, waits patiently. And the focus here is actually love waits patiently on and for people. So you can be patient with circumstances. You can be patient with circumstances in a line and say, you know what, we'll get through, I'll get the stuff I need, I'll get through the line, it'll be okay. But then when somebody in the line is rude to you, is it harder to be patient with that person? See, love values people, doesn't it? Love is patient, and the emphasis on this word is with people. The word in the original language is makrothemeo, and it does have to do with patience. Love is patient. It waits patiently for people. Some different versions of this are translated forbearance. That's not a word we use very often. But are you willing to bear along with people, hang in with people, don't give up on people? Or long-suffering is an old version of this as well. Are you willing to be long-suffering with people? So here's what I want to do. I want to connect these first two positive words. Love is patient, love is kind, and then it jumps into the negative descriptions of what love isn't. But love puts up with people and actively works for their good. That first part, love puts up with people, that's the patience. Forbears with people, suffers long with people, love puts up with people. So there's two things we need to see about that. One is, you may be a little offended by that, right? Wait, I'm lovable all in myself. Nobody needs to put up with me, right? I'm so great. Exactly. No. Love puts up with our junk. There can be a way we use the word love in our language that's just like, no, the person loves me because I am so lovable. I am so great. Well, that might not be love then. Because love puts up with. Love hangs in with. Love doesn't quit on people. Love puts up with people. So we need to see that, but we also see the thing that we need to be patient to do that, don't we? We need to be patient with people. So, patiently waiting. Everybody's really good at that, right? Sometimes, sometimes not. That's the reality, isn't it? But here's what we need to hear. I am not the source of love. We saw that last week, right? You are not the source of love. We can't love if we don't get it from God first. God loved us first, therefore we love. It's a response to His love. I can't love unless it's God's love channeling through me. Here's what that says. If I'm not patient, I might be out of sync with God, right? There's something about my loving God that's off because I'm not patient with you. You see that? There's something about my loving God that's not overflowing into my loving for you. That says I have a love problem with God. Love is patient. Love patiently waits. Love acts with kindness. Love is kind. Love acts with kindness. As again I said, these are all verbs. So think of the actions, think of the evidences, because I can say I love you and then I can rob you, right? That's just a lie then. It's not true. I can say I love you and then I never ever spend time with you and I want to get away from you as quickly as possible, right? That's probably not love either, right? And so there is an evidencing of love when we are shaped by God's love. First, it was the patience. Second, it has to do with kindness. Let's think about kindness a little bit. Here's what I don't want you to hear is nice. Why? Because it's much more than that. This word kindness, Christuomai in the original language, the reason I'm going to keep saying these words in the original language is I want you to hear, I'm not just making this up. These are not my words. These are God's words. That's why I'm going to keep saying them today. So this word kindness, Christuomai, it involves action, stepping forward to solve a problem or to share a burden or to meet a need. I'm going to say that again. It involves action. It's stepping up, stepping forward to solve a problem, share a burden, meet a need. You could also say it this way, doing, that's the action part, doing what is right. Love does what is right. Love acts with kindness. Because what is felt by me to be nice might not always be what is good for me. Does that make sense? And so love sees through that. I'd love to talk to you after about this.
But did you just say, so the acts with kindness, it means doing what is right?
Yes, that is correct. Yep, absolutely. So love is kindness. That is, love is doing what is right. And so when we're thinking through this, we have to discern, I'd rather just be nice and not cause waves, right? But if I love you and I see what I might want to do to not cause waves might not be the best for you. And so I need to think through that, and that is what kindness is. So love hangs in with people, love is patient with people, and we're forgiving people up to 70 times 7, right? And so we're willing to hang in with people, but love also kind of thinks through that, has the end in mind, and says, I'm going to think through what's actually good. And notice you have to step up and do that. It involves action. To solve a problem, share a burden, you have to have skin in the game, right? If I say I love you and I see something that is good for you and I should help you with it and I don't, I'm not loving. I'm not showing the kindness of God's love. That's what God's loving kindness is, built on the Old Testament. There's a Hebrew word called chesed, God's loyal love that will never let the objects of his love down. God will show up when you need him if you are his child. And if we are marked by that love and living out that love together, and then we don't show up for each other when we need it, that just says we're not living out that love, right? If we love, we will show up and demonstrate kindness. 1 John 5:2-3 says this, by this we know what love, or that we love the children of God, when we love God and observe his commandments. Do you see that? It's bringing this definition further. Well, how do you know when you love within the church? Well, it's when we're really nice. Maybe, and it will often look nice, but it's much more than that. By this we know that we love the children of God. How? We do what's right. We love God first and do what he says for each other, with each other. That's what love is. For this is the love of God, he goes on, that we keep his commandments. And hear this part, they're not a burden. Isn't that amazing? So here's what I'm not saying. Obey everything in the Bible perfectly and you'll attain to love. That's a works-based gospel. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is when I truly love God, That love will flow through me, and it will flow through me shaped by what this says, and it will be good for you. And if it's not shaped by what this says, and if it's not matching that, it's not God's love. It's something else. We may call it love, but it's not God's love. Romans 2:4. Do you think lightly of the riches of his kindness? It's the same word there. Do you think lightly of the riches of his kindness? The riches of his kindness, that's he does step up and do what's right, doesn't he? He does what is right for you. Do you think lightly of the riches that there are there? And tolerance and patience. Notice the tolerance and patience are linked to the kindness that is good for you, doing what is right there. Do you think lightly of the riches of his kindness and tolerance and patience, not knowing that the kindness of God leads you to a change of mind? That's what the word repentance means. The kindness of God will lead you to clear thinking, changing your mind, thinking about what is true. Why would it do that? Because that's how we know what love is, right? God's love flows through me, and I'm shaped by truth, and it leads you to think more clearly. And you say, I just spent time with that person, with that brother or sister in Christ, and my head was just clearer. Why is that? Because they love you with God's love. Isn't that pretty cool? And sometimes you can see it and define it, and sometimes you don't know what it is, and you just walk away more clear-headed and thinking more accurately and biblically. Why? Just because I hung out with the person and they loved you with God's love. It's amazing. So God's love puts up with people and actively works for their good. That's what God's love is. And then he draws some lines. He describes 8 things that God's love isn't. So let's consider some of those things together, because here's the reality. Love does have boundaries, doesn't it? Love does have boundaries. In its simplest form, I cannot say I love you and steal from you, right? Love does have boundaries. I can't say I love my wife and go sleep with someone else, right? I can't equally be doing the two same things at the same time. It is impossible. Why? Because love isn't that. Love does have lines. Love does have boundary lines. Let's think through what some of those are. Because the reality is, in our culture, there are a lot of things that are thought of as love that may not be love. And maybe even in your and my life, there are things that we think of as love that aren't love. I'm just going to list some. You could probably write down, think through a whole lot more. Infatuation. It's not love. It's infatuation. Addiction. I'm addicted to you. Is that love? Sure isn't. And it's harmful. It is not pure. It is not good. Codependency is not love. It's a problem. Sexual abuse is not love. Manipulation is not love. Here's one we really need to think through. Half-truths. Half-truths are not love. Let's press that further. I will legalistically control you to be a godly person. That's not love. Exactly. That is not love. But it happens in the name of love, doesn't it? Because it's easier to control legalistically than to trust God to work, isn't it? It's just easier. But that is not love. These are half-truths. Where you mix it in and you're like, but they care about being godly. That's good. Why are you picking on it? Here's why I'm picking on it. You're putting yourself in the place of God. And you aren't the source and substance of love. God is. We have to be willing to be challenged here. Because what we think of is love may or may not be. God gets to define the lines. And when we color outside of those lines, it's not love according to God. God is love. So here's the first of the descriptions of what love isn't: jealousy. Love does not act with jealousy. Love does not act with jealousy. The word here is ou, that's the word not, and zeloe. We might hear the word zealous in there a little bit. Zealous and jealousy are very connected. So that's interesting to think through, because what we're going to see as we unpack this, pull all this out, is at the root of it, there's an attraction to something. And so jealousy, I'm attracted to my neighbor's Camaro, I'm jealous of it, right? I'm attracted to that person's spouse, I'm jealous of it. I'm not giving you real examples of what I'm thinking and wrestling through, but I'm just, when we're thinking through these things, this is how that works. There's a base attraction, but here's the thing that may or may not be good. I'm attracted to my wife. Is that good? Yes. I am zealous for her. In a sense, jealous for her. I don't want her to love somebody else like she loves me. But this says love doesn't act with jealousy. So this has everything to do with what the lines are and who defines the lines. Some versions say envy, and that one just kind of makes sense. That makes sense of it because you understand those lines are different. I'm not being jealous for something that isn't mine. That's what envying is. I'm content with what God has given me. And I'm zealous for that. For my church, my children, my spouse, my stuff that God has given me. To enjoy those. Not to be attracted to somebody else's life, but to be content with my own life. David wrote a psalm that said it this way: the boundary lines of my life have fallen in pleasant places to me. There is a good form of jealousy. 2 Corinthians 11, 2 and 3. Paul says, "For I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy." See, love doesn't envy, isn't attracted to things that are outside of the lines for you, but it is attracted to things that are good. For I am jealous for you, that he's talking to the church family with a godly jealousy. So he's looking at people like you in a room like this. He's writing letter by distance, but in his mind, he's thinking about people who are gathered together, a local church, and he's saying, I'm jealous for you with a godly jealousy. What he's not saying is, I'm jealous for your accolades, your applause, I'm jealous for all of that, because he already confronted that. He's not saying, I'm jealous for control over you, that you will all do what I say, because he said already, don't follow me unless it's the things I do that are like Christ. Don't do that other stuff that I do. What is it then? So he goes on and says, I betrothed you to one husband so that to Christ I might present you as a pure virgin. It has to do with their love for Jesus. That's what he's jealous of. I'm afraid, though, that as a serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, your minds will be led astray from the simplicity and purity of devotion to Christ. And he was zealous that that wouldn't happen, because that's outside of the lines. You're God's children. He paid for you when he died and paid for your sins on the cross, and you're loving someone else and something else more than him? I'm zealous that you wouldn't do that, but that you would come back to a simple, pure devotion to Jesus Christ. And that's a good jealousy, right? So does that make sense? Love isn't zealous for things that are outside of the lines God has drawn for you. But it is grateful for the things God's given you. And zealous for Jesus, that's a godly jealousy. Secondly, love doesn't brag. Love does not brag. This word brag, again, it's the word, you're going to keep saying the OU in English. That's the word ou, that's the word not. So I want you to see here in this, it's ou perperuetai. Perperuetai. In 1 Corinthians 13:4, the passage where we are, Gerard Kittle, who's a Greek scholar, says it carries such varied nuances as arrogance, pretension, and impotent, that's not powerful, empty chatter. So here's those again. It carries here in 1 Corinthians 13 varied nuances such as arrogance, pretension, and impotent or empty, powerless chatter. Empty words flowing from my mouth. That's what's in view here. There's something to it that maybe it's pretense. What is pretense? Pretense is where you pretend to be somebody you're not, right? Love doesn't pretend to be somebody they're not. That's bragging. We might think of bragging as only, I say great things about myself. That's not actually it. It's much more than that. It's all the times where you pretend to be more than you are. You pretend to be less than you are. You put on airs, you have fake, and you say, I'm okay when you're dying inside. Or you say, woe is me, it's the end of the world, when you actually know you're a child of God and it's going to be okay. You're believing wrong things and you're saying wrong things and your words are empty and it's just chatter. Love isn't empty though, is it? Love is filled with God Himself, His love for us. So love does not brag. Love doesn't brag. The third thing, it doesn't act with arrogance. Love does not act with arrogance. Fusaiutai. Puffed up would be our phrase. You can write that right in there. That's exactly our word in English or phrase in English to describe it as puffed up. Puffed up. Act with arrogance. They're talking about me again, and there's just something in me that I feel good because they're talking about me. That's what he's talking about. Now, there's a sense in which it's good to receive love. I'm glad people who love me remember me, right? That's different. That's receiving love, and you can do that with humility. But there is something different that it's just, they talked about me, what are they saying? And it's just something in you. It's almost, there's a little smirk, the edges of your mouth just start to curl up, and you're like, you stand taller. Be careful. Be careful. Because we talk about love in our culture like this all the time as, you're the wind in my sails, right? That's arrogance. Why is that arrogance? Doesn't that seem a little weird? Why is that arrogance? Because it replaces God as the source of love. You are the source of my love if that's what I'm doing. Or on the reverse, I'm the source of your love. If I say the right thing, it'll put them in the right mood, and then my night will be better. What did you just do? You replaced God. Love is not arrogant, though. Love is not puffed up. 1 Corinthians 4:6. Paul talked a lot about this one in 1 Corinthians. He said in 1 Corinthians 4:6, now these things, brothers, I have figuratively applied to myself and Apollos for your sakes, so that in us you may learn not to exceed what is written, so that no one of you will become arrogant in behalf of one against another. What did that just say? When you exceed what is written in the Bible, you became arrogant. When you love outside of the lines that God has drawn in the Bible, you are arrogant. That's what Paul just said. 1 Corinthians 5:2. You have become arrogant and have not mourned. Instead, so that the one who had done this deed would have been removed from your midst. This is the time where there was the sexual misconduct, and he said, because of your arrogance, because you thought you got to define what church should look like, not God, you just kind of let this slide and acted as though this sexual misconduct wasn't a big deal. That's not humility. That's arrogance. Because you are putting yourself in the place of God, and love will never do that. And as I said last week, I can't love you. I can't love anyone if I'm not loving God fully. If he doesn't have the first place as the source and substance of love, our love is not love. It's something else. Here's the next one. It does not act indecently. Does not act unbecomingly. Some versions have. It does not act inappropriately. It does not act in ways that are not fitting, unfittingly, that are not right, that are not good. It doesn't act indecently. When I studied out this word indecently throughout the Bible, every time that I found that it's used, it had to do with sexual misconduct. It's not what the word means in and of itself. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that by and large seems to be the way humanity lives that out and substitutes other things for love. So self-gratification in a sexual form isn't love, is it? Interesting. I'm not going to dig fully into that this morning, but God has designed love as selfless giving, right? We know love by this, that God laid down his life, his son for us. He died for our sins. We also see in God's love, as we saw last week, that he took delight in his son. So he got that sense of something back, didn't he? But it wasn't selfish, is what we saw last week. Within God himself, because he's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, he's always selfless. But yet, he enjoys it. And so there is enjoyment, but it's not selfish. That's indecent. You're outside of the lines. There should be joy, but not self-serving indecency. Of course, the word indecent is a good translation. Just what is fitting, what is right, what is good. If you're not doing that, you might not be thinking about the other person. Is that fair to say? If you walk into a funeral and party time, like that's indecent, right? You might not be thinking about the people who are in the room. Is that fair to say? That's not love. Love sees people. Love sees what's happening and thinks through, am I acting in a way that's fitting, that is good? And this flows right into the next one, that's love is not self-seeking. Love does not seek its own. Jesus said in Luke 6:32, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Anybody can do that, right? For sinners do that. Don't just love those who love you. Oh, I'll love you if I get something back. But what if you don't get something back? Remember, you still have to be patient. You still have to not give up and hang in with the people, or it's not love. You may not get what you want in return, but if God's love is filling you, you can keep loving, can't you? Peter wrote it this way, love stretchingly. Love fervently is the word in most English languages, and it brings to mind the image of you've already ran a marathon, you're at the very end of it, you have nothing left, and you can hear the words of your coach saying, you can, your muscles can stretch a little further, and you're like, no, they can't! Yes, they can, and you do it, and you finish it, and sometimes love feels that way, doesn't it? I can't love anymore. I can't forgive again. I can't be patient. They're annoying. I can't. Why does it feel that way? Because it's self-seeking. We're not fully satisfied in our God. That's why it feels that way. And that's why we can't love others if we're not loving God. Love is not self-seeking. Love is not provoked. Love is not provoked. Let's think through this one. Love is a response, but let me tell you what I mean by that. It is a response to God. We love because he first loved us. Love is a response to God, period. You with me? Love is not provoked. Interesting. You might say, in a sense, it's contagious because when I feel a brother or sister in Christ love me with God's love, I want to love too, but it is not provoked. We really need to think through this. This is a big thing. Here's why. I can look at an injustice in the world. That's wrong. And I can be provoked by it to solve it, do something, and say that's love. And doesn't it sound like it is? What's missing though? God is the source and the substance of love. What's better is I see something wrong in the world, wherever it is. I see that's wrong, and that I'm not provoked. But I see it's wrong, and I talk to God about it. And then I do something. Do you hear the difference? One completely takes God out of it. And then we somehow pretend I'm angry at sin and I'm a better Christian. You know what Paul says in the context of 1 Corinthians? You're arrogant. Wow. That's quite the claim, isn't it? You're arrogant because you replaced God, and you think your visceral, quick response to evil somehow makes you a better person. It doesn't. It doesn't. When you can see God for who he is, see evil for what he is, and then say, God is better than this, and this is wrong, that's the right context, right? And that's love. But love is not just provoked. That's wrong. I got to do something. No, you don't. You have to check with God first and ask him if you should do something. And if you didn't, you might be out of bounds and you may not be living in love. That's interesting. That's something to really sit with. Because we get provoked, don't we? But what this says is, the moment I get provoked, what do? I fix my eyes on the person of love again. That's what I do. And I say, God, what do you want to do? And it's not that you should somehow pretend the evil thing isn't evil. It is evil. It's that you shouldn't play God. It's not provoked. Two more. It doesn't keep a record of wrong. This is another hard one. Do you hear that some of these are tough? So here again is what I'm not saying. I'm not saying perfect all of these, get really good at doing all of these, and then you will attain to love. I'm not saying that. I'm saying when you love with God's love, when you receive his love, when you bask in his love, when you enjoy his love, when it shapes you, this will be the evidence of it. Because love does those things you don't. Do you hear it? God is love. He does those things in you. We don't do them and attain to his love. We love him, and then it shapes us. Love does not keep a record of a wrong. Hear those words exactly how they are. Some of your versions have that as plural. It's not. It's singular. Love doesn't keep a record of a wrong. That's harder, isn't it? You read it and you say, well, love doesn't keep a record of wrongs. Well, in general, I don't do that. I don't have this hit list of people that have wronged me. I'm not one of those crazy people. But when you say love doesn't keep record of a wrong, that's very specific, isn't it? So now you really have to wrestle with it. Here's what it doesn't say. It doesn't say love doesn't recognize that it was wrong. Because you do. You should, right? God does, and he is love. It doesn't say you shouldn't call it wrong. You should. It is. It was. It doesn't say you should let somebody who's doing wrong things to you keep doing them to you. Does it? But it does say you don't keep a record. You don't, this is an accounting term. A ledger, a book. You're writing it down. It's in your records. Love doesn't do that. This is hard for maybe some of you. It's really hard for certain things. There may be a memory of some time you were wronged 40 years ago that as soon as this popped up, you're like, oh no. That's just it. You may not have a written record somewhere, but you do up here. And you're like, wait, but love doesn't do that? No, it doesn't. And here again is what I'm not telling you. You have to figure it out on your own and get that away. What I'm telling you is love will do that for you. God will do that for you. Will you trust him? Because that question, you have to come face to face with that all the time, don't you? Because you get wronged all the time, don't you? It doesn't say you're not going to talk to somebody who wrongs you, does it? Oh, I'm not going to say anything. It doesn't say that. But it does say you will not keep a record. Hold it against them. There will not be vindictiveness in you. You will not, I'm remembering that. That's going to come back to you, and I'm going to celebrate when it does, right? It's not that. That isn't love. Love doesn't keep a record of a wrong. So this is one where maybe for you today, this is it. Maybe it was one of the other ones. Maybe for you, this is the thing that you say, I need help, God. Because it's not just one wrong. I have more than one wrong that I didn't mean to keep a record of it, but I did. And I can't forgive. But you need to forgive. You need to forgive. Jesus said every time you pray, you're supposed to forgive. Does that sound important? Every time you pray, you talk to God and say, do I have a record of somebody who's wronged me that I'm just holding it as though I'm God and they're accountable to me? See, again, you're arrogant. You're in the place of God again. And every time you pray, you have to not pretend it wasn't wrong. And not forget it, because you probably won't. He doesn't say that either. But he does say you have to somehow release it to God. Why can you do that? Because God is just. And God is good, and God is holy, and God knows how to handle the things that have hurt you, right? And Jesus died for those sins, and one day he will set everything right in this world. Do you trust him or do you not? And it becomes a crisis of the will in that point where you're like, I don't want to let go of this, but I need to let go of it. But I want to love God, but I can't. I don't know what to do. And what it comes down to is, do you trust God? Do I really trust God with this? Because if I don't, I'm going to keep a record. Aren't you? And if I do, I can forgive. Can't you? And it's not unjust. Because Jesus paid the price for all of our sins in his body on the cross once for all time. That's how we know what love is. Love doesn't keep a record of a wrong. If you're wrestling with that, I'd love to talk with you about that. I'd love to pray with you about that. This isn't always easy. Often it's really not easy. But love doesn't keep a record of a wrong. But isn't it just easier to talk about wrongs than rights? I heard somebody talking about this last week in a message somewhere, and he was saying, you know, some people have records written of things, journals. This person wronged me. It was hard. I didn't know what to do with it. He's like, why don't we have journals filled with, this person was kind, they were nice, it made me feel good. It's easier to talk about wrongs. It's easier to remember wrongs. It's easier to think about the politician back in the 70s who did something and screwed up our country. But love doesn't keep a record of a wrong, does it? If you are doing that, are you loving? This is a deep one, isn't it? We have to really wrestle with this. And again, I'm not telling you to fix it. I'm telling you to bask in God's love and He will fix it. Love doesn't keep a record of a wrong. And then the final description of what love is not is found in verse 6. This one's interesting because he quickly counteracts it. Love does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. Love does not, will not rejoice in unrighteousness. Something that is unrighteous, that is wrong, that is sin, love will not rejoice in. It will not. So somebody might say to you, and probably has, well, if you love me, won't you just accept my choices? Yeah, but your choice was to completely destroy your body and to hurt everybody around you. Why would I rejoice in that? And it's one thing to bear with them through that. Love does do that, right? Love is patient and forgiving and willing to forgive up to 70 times 7. They bear with it, but to rejoice is a whole different level, isn't it? And our culture increasingly is asking us to rejoice in unrighteous things. Love will not do that. Love will not do that. But here's one that kind of gives some nuance to it we should wrestle with just a little bit. Proverbs 24:17 and 18 says that we shouldn't rejoice when our enemy falls. So what if somebody who does wicked things gets what's coming to him? You shouldn't rejoice. Or you are not wise. You are not loving. Interesting. Do not rejoice when your enemy falls, and do not let your heart be glad when he stumbles. Why did Solomon say that? Because you want to. Something in us says, but that it was Hitler. He should have been murdered. He should have lost his life, right? Be careful. Again, I'm not saying you don't recognize justice. I am saying, or I'm not saying, the Bible is clearly saying, do not rejoice. Why? It's sad. That's what sin does to this world. There's nothing good in that. Why would you rejoice in that? We shouldn't. Don't let your heart be glad when your enemy stumbles. Oh, that person cut in line in front of me and then they tripped. Oops. I just celebrated, right? My heart just rejoiced in it. What does that say? I'm not loving. That's what it says. It takes all kinds of forms, right? Some really heavy and some really light. But it all is an evidence of whether or not I'm loving and you are loving. Loving God first and then loving others. And here's what we see in verse 6. It doesn't rejoice in unrighteousness, but it does rejoice, doesn't it? And it rejoices in ways that are true and good. Love rejoices in the truth. Love there's something about us that the more we hear something true said, we're like, joy. There's something, a joy that shapes us and fills us when we hear somebody speak truth into a situation. Not when we hear somebody take justice into their own hands and replace God, but when truth is spoken. That when truth comes to a situation, we rejoice. So love does shape your joys, doesn't it? And your joys aren't always linked to what they should be, are they? Because there are times where things happen and somebody did something to you and then something bad happens to them. And you're like, karma! Or you just kind of smirk and you know not to say anything, but you're like, I'm kind of glad to see it. But love shapes your joy. To not do that. But to rejoice in truth. Because love cares about people, right? Even the most wicked of people. Well, how is that just? How is that okay? You know how that's okay? Jesus paid the price. And while you were a sinner, while I was yet a sinner, Jesus died for me. If I don't view everybody through the lens of that love, I'm not living in that love. I cannot say, I love you, God, and rejoice while an enemy falls. I cannot say, I love you, God, but I can't be patient with that person because I'm lying. I can't say, I love you, God, and then act indecently. I can't say, I love you, God, and just be provoked because both can't happen at the same time. And here's where I'm going to try to pull this together for us. It is a process to grow in for us, isn't it? Because we're not perfect at it. And so here's what could happen. I could be loving God, really loving God, and then 30 seconds later get provoked because I'm not loving God anymore. And then what do? I turn it back to love for God and say, I'm sorry, God, I lost sight of loving you and loving people. I lost sight of that. But 1 John said it really, really clearly. You're lying if you say you love God and you don't love each other. You're lying. And this is what love looks like. We'll finish it up next week as we think through the final descriptions here of what love is. But we saw last week that love is important. And we saw this week that love is a better way. You have ways of solving problems, but love's a better one. Love God and love others. Let's pray.